Alright guys, we're back at our study again, Exodus 20, and talking about how obedience is a product of faith. And this one here is getting into the fourth commandment, which is probably going to stir some people up, but it is what it is. I'm not going to get into the debate between Sabbaths and what has changed and what has not. Um, Ultimately, in my mind, this is a Romans 14 issue. But, you know, Paul talked about basically the law of conscience, so, um, I would let the Holy Spirit go ahead and guide you on this one. But what I do want to talk about is how obedience to this is a product of faith. And we see here, we start in verse 8, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it." So we see here in this particular passage that that we're talking about the Sabbath, or the Sabbath, and basically one thing that I want you to see here is that this is all in regards to work. Um, we don't see anything in here pertaining to worship. This is all in regards to work, and how that relates to the faith concept is the fact that we know that when this was given, when it was given, or when it was outlined and prescribed, in during the Exodus, as they were traveling, to the Promised Land, exiting Egypt. One of the things that God had done was He had rained down manna, and He told them, okay, 6 days, or 5 days rather, you're going to collect the food. On the sixth day, you're going to collect twice as much food, so that on the seventh you can rest. And we see that even in that context, that it's a matter of faith. It's a matter of trusting that God will provide, number one. Many of us have a tendency, particularly in this particular, in the West, in this particular economy, where we begin to seek after money, success, and things like this, and we start chasing after those things. And God has told us here that that this is an issue of obedience, but more so an issue of faith, where we trust in Him to provide for our needs, and to do so within that 6 day confine. And this prevents two things. Number one, it prevents us from getting overly focused on money and gains and worldly possessions and things like that. It prevents us from getting off track there. But number two, it also keeps us focused on God, because one day out of the week we set apart to not do any work, and to just be thankful for what it is that God has provided for us. I do think that you can kind of get off topic here when you start debating over which days you worship. We can see that in Romans 14. I know I said I wasn't going to get into this, but we can see that in Romans 14 that one guy views one day as higher than another. Another one views every day as a day of worship. And I do think that we can become very pharisaical when we start basically debating the day that you worship. Understand that that's not what's going on here. This is talking about a day of rest. I personally do not see anything unbiblical about an individual who decides to take Saturday off of work in observance to the Sabbath, and then goes to church on Sunday. We don't see that. I know a lot of people try to kind of, well, anyway, I'm not going to keep going down that road. those are basically my thoughts. One thing that I wanted to kind of point out here is that as we're going through verses 8 through 11, understand that the context of this is always about work. The context of this commandment is always about work. It's not about worship. And the purpose is to keep us focused on God. Now, God prescribing this to us is a grace. It is a mercy. It is a way of God foretelling us that our natural tendency is to drift away from Him in times of blessing. And we could see that throughout the Old Testament, particularly with Israel. And by Him telling us, look, one day a week, I want you to take, and I want you to not work. I want you to not worry about your own gains, your own possessions, your own things, and I want you to just focus on me. Just take time off and be thankful and grateful for what it is that I have provided. And I do think that's the ultimate message here behind this, is an ongoing dependence and an ongoing focus on the Father. So that's the fourth commandment there, and we'll continue going through these, may do one or two at a time, but then we'll move on to other sections where commands were given, and we'll look at how that pertains to faith. So, all right, God bless.